Well, it's a big week upcoming in the EFL Championship as we return today for Matchweek 7 predictions for the 24-25 season and the start of the first 3-game week with a full midweek fixture list to follow on Tuesday and Wednesday. Today, though, we're going to look ahead to the weekend's action, preview and predict the score for all 12 matches as always, and I'll encourage you to get involved down in the comments below. Give us your predictions for this weekend's action, and if you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out in a recap on Sunday evening when we look ahead to the midweek action. And that video will be out quite late in the evening because the Sunday Championship game doesn't even finish till 5 p.m. But before we go and focus on match week 7, which obviously starts with my club, let's go and have a look back at what happened last weekend, because after my slow start to the season, it is 2 strong performances in a row. As you can see, I picked up 13 points in total, 3 perfect scores, and just annoyed that I changed QPR Millwall because it would have been a brilliant week. But still, perfect scores for 2-1 wins at home for both Bristol City and Luton, and for the 2-0 win away for Leeds United at Cardiff, which consequently lost Errol Balut his job. I was beaten by a few of you in the comments though. Third place for me, but joint second, we have 4 people who picked up 14 points. So Ojo, Peter, Darren and Mello, a massive well done to all of you. All of you got 3 perfect scores in that as well. But leader of the pack with 16 this week, and considering he was late in and missed the Friday night game as well, a great effort from Jimmo from 11 games. 4 perfect scores, the 2 draws for QPR Millwall and for Preston Blackburn, but also wins for Burnley and Leeds with a correct score, give you 16 points and 8 correct outcomes out of 11. Not bad going at all. Let's go and move on to match week 7 though and see if I can keep up my good form for a 3rd successive match day. We start on Friday night with a game that, on a quick side note, I'm very annoyed got moved to Friday at the start of the season. If this had been on Saturday, I'd have been ticking off my 63rd ground of the 92. As it is Plymouth Argyle versus Luton Town, and I will have to watch from home. But in more positive news, it is back-to-back wins now for Luton Town, albeit a little less convincingly against Sheffield Wednesday. I'll be honest, for the first hour, it was a pretty drab game. I don't think either side offered a lot going forward. Danny Roll's side tried to play on the counter. Luton tried to play possession pace, but it was a little bit sloppy. It was a little bit slow. Didn't quite have the tempo to it. And in the second half, whilst obviously I can't be too critical of it because it helped us get 3 points, you have to feel for Deshaun Bernard because at 1-0 up, Sheffield Wednesday were producing a great away performance. And Luton Town got away with one because it was never a handball. But the penalty was given, it was scored, and the rest is history. I do want to say, though, in the last half an hour, some really good signs for Luton. One, finally a striker scoring this year, but also the introduction off the bench of Crowd, the centre midfielder, and also Victor Moses on the right for his debut. 2 really strong, encouraging cameos, and I think both of them probably in contention to start this weekend. For Plymouth, a 1-0 defeat against West Brom. A bit of a frustrating day for them because on the score sheet it looks like, yes, it's a little bit closer. The stats were actually pretty level for the game. Plymouth kept the ball pretty well. They created some chances. Had one pretty good one with Morgan Whittaker after a Bartley mistake. But they did give up a few great chances still. And this is my concern with Plymouth, particularly away from home. Can you keep giving up great chances over and over again? Surely someone's going to take them eventually. But for Plymouth, a better result. Still unbeaten at home after that win against Sunderland and a draw with Hull. But Luton are just starting to find form without being convincing. Once they do click, I think it's going to be better. But I think there will be a couple of changes based on those cameos I mentioned. So in this game, I am going to go with heart over head. I was thinking about the Championship's favourite scoreline. I'm going to go for Luton to nick it by the same score again. It got me a perfect one last weekend. I'm going for 2-1 to Luton at Plymouth Argyle. Let's move on to Saturday and the 3 early kickoffs to begin. It is Blackburn Rovers versus QPR. Blackburn remain unbeaten after a 0-0 draw at Preston. But I think we saw what might be the Achilles heel because a few people mentioned in the comments last week about being dark horses. And it's been a great start and some of the signings are very good. However, one of the challenges we hadn't seen them face yet, because they were expected to be a side down there, a lot of people were sort of setting up a bit more gung-ho against them, trying to get goals. Preston obviously got a first half red card. They're not the most expansive team anyway. And then they just put 10 behind the ball against Blackburn. And Blackburn couldn't create anything. Without that space to run in behind for the likes of a Hashi, for Vyman off the bench, for Gahey, whoever it may be, they didn't look like being creative or being a force going forward. and that perhaps is a concern. The late red card for Beck, not quite sure what was going on there. Looked more of a bite the other way, to be honest, but we've had enough bites in the EFL the last week or so. It just gave me a little bit of a concern for Blackburn that they didn't have a way to break down the side that sat behind the ball. And there may be a few, particularly who now go to Ewood Park after their strong start and think, well, we can do that to them and maybe just hit them on the counter. Maybe that's where the problems come. For QPR, been a lot of draws this season. 4 Championship's favourite scorelines already. The latest was a 1-1 draw at home to Millwall. It was a decent game for Frey up front again, who got himself another goal, a player I'm a big fan of. But QPR was second best for the most part. They had a lot of the ball, but didn't create many chances. Millwall had plenty more against them, and on another day could have won it. Went close a couple of times too. So not been the most consistent start to the season for the R's, but this is a game where if Blackburn are expansive at home, as we've seen in recent times, the people like Frey on the counter can be a threat. For me though, I just feel Blackburn are in the better form of the two. QPR probably will come out to play a little, but they just need to have a solid season, and at the moment that's what they're doing. I don't think they're going to get anything out of this one. I was very tempted to go for a 1-1 draw. We're going to go for Blackburn to keep up their home form with a 2-1 win at Ewood Park. The second early kickoff sees us move to the Midlands for Derby County versus Norwich City. Derby probably been one of the positive starters this season, one of the surprises, and their home form has been remarkable. They've been gritty, they've won 3 games with 3 clean sheets, and against Bristol City they look better going forward. However, at Sheffield United, look, they did pretty well to restrict the score to 1, but they didn't offer a thing going forward. It was clear what the game plan was, and it looked great at half-time, but once Gustavo Harmer scored, there was nothing really going forward for Derby. There was no sign they would ever get back into the game. But let's be fair, this is how they're going to set up away from home this year, see if they can nick up points. And if their home form stays the way it has been, then it's going to be a decent season for them. Norwich City have not been the best travellers this year. I know they got the 1-0 win against Coventry, but they were battered in that game. They lost the other ones away from home. However, the home performance against Watford last weekend, probably the first time we saw football. We saw what we were expecting to get from this coach at Norwich City. It didn't flatter them at all. They created bundles of clear-cut chances. They were brilliant to watch. It was the first excellent Norwich performance of the season for me. But away from home, it's a very different story. And while there may be a shock here, there's a temptation to maybe go for a draw. Based on the fact that Derby have won all their home games, Norwich have looked far from convincing on the road and only scored 1 goal themselves. I'm going to go for Derby to nick a gritty one by 1-0. The final early kickoff is the team I watched at Luton Town last weekend. It is Sheffield Wednesday versus league leaders West Bromwich Albion. West Brom still unbeaten, of course, with that 1-0 win against Plymouth, though some concern about the chances they didn't take and the moments where it almost got a little bit too easy and they made poor mistakes like Bartley at the back, which nearly let Whittaker in. But overall, it's been a fantastic start. 4 clean sheets in their last 5. They're scoring goals. Josh Maja's at it again. It's been a really strong start to the season. For Sheffield Wednesday, on the points board, not so much. They've only got 4 from their 6 matches, but they've played some tough sides. And against Luton at the weekend, it was a decent performance. Yes, as I mentioned, wasn't a lot going forward for either side in the first half or hour or so. But Barry Bannon took his goal really well from a mistake. And after that, as I mentioned, they were incredibly unfortunate. I think a draw would have been a fair result for the game, but the referee had other ideas. And while it benefited my team, you want to see it done the right way. And that handball for the penalty was a really poor decision. The referee's view was obstructed. It made me really surprised that he went for it because his view was obstructed. It's on the goal line. It's a huge decision. And when it's not on the linesman's side as well, it's easier to say, I can't see that conclusively than to try and guess. And it just really cost them the game, didn't it? They were decent against QPR. They were okay against Luton. It's just the late goals. I think in time they'll be absolutely fine. And Danny Roll, still one of my favourite managers in the Championship. I think they'll give West Brom a game. And there's part of me that thinks this will be a thriller. There's nothing to suggest it on West Brom's defensive record, or really on Sheffield Wednesday's attacking one this year. But instead of going for the Championship's favourite scoreline of 1-1, I'm going to throw in a 2-2 draw here. I've just got a feeling this is going to be the game to watch at the 3 lunchtime ones. So with that surprise scoreline, let's move on to the 3 PMs, and it is the latest managerless side in the Championship at the time of recording. It is Hull City versus managerless Cardiff City. Tim Walter got his first win for Hull City in the league last week. We watched that here on Friday night against Stoke. One of the most bizarre Championship games I've watched for a long time. The first half, Hull were atrocious. They were caught playing out from the back time and time again. They gave away a free header from a set piece. And then in the second half, I know Hull did well to get back into it. You've got to say fair play to them and to Walter for the subs, because Slater made an impact. They had players that came on and made a real difference. It was a really bizarre game. Hull didn't have to do an awful lot. I still wouldn't say they looked like an incredibly threatening attacking force, but that first win is going to make a difference. You can see the players are starting to adapt to the style, and once they gained a little bit of confidence from the equaliser, they did look a different team. So I'm not sure it's the revolutionary result they were hoping for, but as they come up against another team massively out of form, who may or may not have a manager appointed by the weekend, they'll fancy their chances of adding to the score sheet. They'd gone with 3 without scoring before that, and Cardiff City, who they face, have also gone 3 without scoring. Errol Balut had his reign finished with a 2-0 defeat at home to Leeds United. An early red card left it as probably a matter of time, to be honest, and it didn't take long after that for Leeds to take the lead. It was a 2-0 win, but it could have been more. Cardiff only had 20% of the ball. They offered nothing, but it's been a really poor start. And Errol Balut, he's gone off after a good first season. It sort of fell away towards the end, and this year, it's not looked great, has it? Who will come in? We'll wait and see. At the time of recording, it's close between a few favourites. So for this game, I'm going to go for a Championship's favourite scoreline. I don't think either side have looked convincing. I think Cardiff will set up fairly cautiously away from home, and I think Hull will struggle with that a bit. I don't know what to predict. I don't know whether Cardiff will have a manager. So I'll sit on the fence and go safe with a 1-1 draw. As we move on to the side that beat Cardiff City last weekend, it is Leeds United versus Coventry City. Coventry lost at home to Swansea after that atrocious start, and I think Mark Robins alluded to the fact that he may have had his team selection swayed by a good midweek cup performance and probably cost them in the first half. It was a decent performance overall from Coventry. They came back into the game, but they don't look clinical at the start of this season. So a bit of a frustrating one for them. They've been close in every game. They've all been settled by a goal either way, but they're just coming out on the wrong end of a few too many at the minute. But they'll recover. They'll be up there. We know how Coventry work. For Leeds United, they put aside that frustration from the defeat at home to Burnley with a good 2-0 win against Cardiff. The thing you can say about Leeds is they're beating all the sides that were in that sort of bottom half last year. Your Cardiff, your Hull, who obviously have drifted since sacking Liam Rossini, and Sheffield Wednesday. They've had a couple of troubles breaking down the better sides in the division, particularly West Brom and Burnley we've mentioned. So what does that mean for the Coventry game? Are Coventry suddenly going to hit form, or are we going to see the same old story? Well, I think Coventry will have a threat on the break against Leeds. Probably suits them to have a bit more space to play into. But at the moment, I just feel Leeds will nick it. I don't think it's going to be a barnstorming win again. I'm going to go for a similar scoreline. Coventry for the 3rd game in a row in all competitions to lose by 2-1. As we move into the second half, it is Middlesbrough versus Stoke City at the Riverside Stadium. Stoke got off to, well, a good 45 minutes under Nasty Palak on Friday. But as we mentioned, both in the live stream and in the whole City section, just a bizarre second half. A team that completely threw away the game. I liken it to when my team Luton played QPR the other week. Again, maybe it was just the Friday night football feel, but giving away really poor goals. And Hull City didn't have to do anything to earn it, which will be the biggest frustration for the new manager. I still don't think sacking Schumacher was the right decision. We talked about it in the manager special. You can find that up in the eye above. But I just think this is going to be a slow start because there's a lot of change. There's a lot of adaptation in terms of the style. And it's going to take a few weeks for them to hit form. However, they've got a chance against the Middlesbrough side who, they beat 5-0 a few weeks ago under Steven Schumacher in the Carabao Cup at the Riverside Stadium. But Middlesbrough, yet again against Sunderland, showed the same old problem. They cannot score goals. They probably, and I know this is a weird thing to say because Sunderland were largely the better team, but Middlesbrough had the best chances in that game. They had a great chance from a header at the start with Tommy Conway, who hit the bar. They missed a couple of others as well. It's a real frustration. You just think if they had what they had 2 years ago up front with either Akpom or Archer, even one of them, they would be so good in this championship. But they've just not got that consistency in front of goal. Unfortunately, it cost them again. They did get done by the press a few times in defensive areas against Sunderland, but overall, I wouldn't be devastated by the performance. There's nothing I've seen that really worries me about Middlesbrough overall. It's just the fact they can't take their chances. And once that starts to happen, if it starts to happen, I'm sure they'll go flying up the division. They're already in a decent position, to be fair, but they could get themselves right in that top 6 mix. For this game, I was really unimpressed by Stoke's mentality. So if Middlesbrough can get the first goal of the game, I think they win comfortably. The longer Stoke can hold out, the more frustrating it gets. Then I think we look at a draw perhaps. But I'm going to go for Middlesbrough to score first. And based on what I saw from Stoke when they conceded last Friday, I have to go for Borough to win by 2-0. As we move on to a game that looks like far from a thriller on paper, it is Millwall versus Preston North End. Let's start with Preston in that turgid game on Sunday, the Lancashire derby. A stupid red card before half-time. Didn't need to fly into the challenge and give the referee a choice, whether you think it was one or not. Then in the second half, they were quite fortunate because Owen Beck got sent off late on, but Osmajic looked like he made the bite. We saw one on the Monday, with Paul Mullin at Wrexham as well, didn't we? I don't know what's going on in the EFL this week. They need to start punishing these before they start coming back into the game again because it's just disgusting, isn't it? But it clearly looked like it, and I don't really know what he was doing. There was absolutely no need for it. Otherwise, Preston defended really well second half. It was a bit more like what we expected under Ryan Lowe, and going down to 10 men sort of suited them down to the ground because then a draw became a decent result. They could just dig in and grit, and they actually had some of the better chances or counter-attacking opportunities after the red card. For Millwall, they'll be much more frustrated at their point against QPR. Of course, Duncan Watmore's looked very good this year so far, but they dominated the game. They had one off the line near the end. I mean, they should have won that match. But one of the positives I take out of Millwall so far this year, and I know there's been odd exceptions like the Luton game and the Hull game, but generally speaking, they've created a lot more chances than I thought they would. And those new attacking players are starting to adapt. And some of the existing ones like Watmore are really finding form. So I think positive signs for Millwall. This game is definitely going to be decided by the first goal. I would be shocked if there's more than 2 in it. I can see a lot of people going 0-0 or 1-1 here. Preston have drawn their last 3 in all competitions. But I'm going to go for Millwall to nick it by 1-0. I can't see it being a pretty game. I think both would be fairly happy with a point, but Millwall might nick it. The odd goal, I'm going for 1-0. As we move on to a game that might be a bit tougher to call than some would have expected a few weeks ago. It is Oxford United versus Burnley, 2 sides that were separated by 2 divisions last season. Burnley continued their decent start with a 2-1 win at home to Portsmouth. It was one of those games that was ended with relief, a 94th minute winner by Josh Brownhill. They did dominate the game, but again, very similar story to one of the other ones we mentioned before. They gave up the best chances to Pompey, who probably should have scored 2. And they looked to threat on a counter-attack, which Burnley struggled with a little bit. We have seen that Burnley have been a little more susceptible in those games they've been expected to dominate. Whereas when we've seen those games where they can go and counter on the road, like Leeds and Luton, they look a real threat. But those games where you expect them to be on the front foot, your Pompey at home, your Blackburn at home, they've just not quite been able to deliver the same. The only one they really did so was Cardiff, but that was due to a number of gifts. For Oxford United, a very half and half start. They'll be delighted with it overall. Away from home and at home, they look like 2 different teams. At home, 3 games, 3 wins, 3 excellent results. And away from home, 3 defeats. However, they have not played a side at home with the quality of Burnley on paper this season, a side expected to be right up the top. They did do okay away at Bristol City. There were loads of great chances in the game. Could have been 3-3, could have been 4-3, could have been anything. But in the end, Bristol City probably just about edged it. But at home, they've looked really good, really solid, really well disciplined tactically. And we mentioned it before, they can almost set up like the away side here because Burnley do struggle to break those types of teams down. And they do give up space on the counter when they're higher up the pitch. So I think we're going to see almost a reverse game here where Burnley keep a lot of the ball, Oxford play a counter-attacking style, and maybe that benefits them. I'm not going to go for them to keep up their 100% home record in this weekend's fixture, but I'm going to go for them to keep up the unbeaten run. I'm going for the Championship's favourite scoreline. 3 to go as we move on to another of the promoted and relegated sides separated by 2 divisions last year. It is Portsmouth versus Sheffield United. Pompey are finally coming to the end of that awful start on paper. We mentioned those 7 games that were just really brutal. They've struggled for goals this season a little bit. Sadie and Lang do look a threat on the break at times, but they've not got that consistent goal scorer without Colby Bishop. They are starting to concede a few more as well, but you've got to bear in mind, we said it right at the start, they could well be on no points after 7 games. They got 3 points in the first 3, which was a great effort. And they'll be delighted when this game's over and they can start to focus on the teams that they should be beating and should be focusing on for the rest of the year if they want to stay up. For Sheffield United, a pretty formidable task to face them at the minute. 3 wins in a row without conceding. They've looked really solid at the start of the season. Gus Harmer's looking a real threat from midfield. Yes, they probably could have scored more against Derby. They had a lot of chances and a lot of territory and a lot of possession without really creating too much that was clear-cut. But they still managed to get the win, and that's a great sign at this stage. They looked really good the week before against Hull City when we were watching them here. Whether or not they can sustain it is another question. They've only let in 3 goals so far this season, which is going to be crucial. I just think they're going to win this game comfortably, and if they can start to hit form in front of goal, I saw even in the Luton game with Pompey, they do offer up chances at home in particular. We saw West Brom put 3 past them. We saw Sunderland do the same. I'm going to go for the same with Sheffield United as well. 4 clean sheets in a row for them and a 3-0 victory down at Fratton Park. And the final game on Saturday is Watford versus Sunderland. It all started so well for Watford, but it's starting to fall away now. 4 without a win in all competitions, albeit a 2-1 defeat against Manchester City is no shame, albeit they were caught out playing from the back very early on in the match, which saw it pretty much done. But the bigger concern has to be the 4-1 defeat at Norwich, a side that played them off the park, and it's the first time they've taken a real beating this year. They didn't create a huge amount themselves, and in the second half, it was one of those where they didn't really offer a lot and started to fall away a bit. Thought it was a really dominant performance from Norwich, and the first real sign of concern under Tom Cleverley this year for Watford. But this is a game where they're not going to be perhaps expected to win because Sunderland made it 5 out of 6 against Middlesbrough. A 1-0 win, a lovely cheeky finish from Chris Rigg. Maybe not a goal of the season contender, as the commentator suggested. But again, it wasn't their best display. They gave up a couple of good chances to Borough. Gave up a lot of the ball, which is seeming to be a habit for them this year. But that's what they did under Mowbray a lot of the time when they were incredibly successful. They're a young team geared toward counter-attacking and pressing high at the right times. And they certainly did it against Borough. They got themselves the win. It's been a really good start for them. But I think there's still signs of susceptibility for both defensively. We saw Sunderland's last away game, that 3-2 defeat at Plymouth. They gave up quite a lot of chances there too. So I'm going to go for a little bit of a thrilling game here. Not sure Watford have got the consistent goals in them now. Those couple of 5-star performances at the start have just dried up. They've only scored 3 in their last 4 matches, 2 in their last 3 championship games. And I'm going to go for them to lose this one to Sunderland, who I just think are more of a threat on the road when they're at their best. The Plymouth game would have given them a wake-up call. And I'm going to go for the same result they got at Pompey, a 3-1 victory for Sunderland. And we move on to Sunday for the final game, which inexplicably is a 3 p.m. kickoff, which will delay our prediction show on Sunday night. It is Swansea City versus Bristol City, and both sides come off a 2-1 victory last weekend. Bristol City in that really entertaining game against Oxford United. Both teams have bundles of chances and bundles of good chances, but Bristol City slightly more clinical. Should have had more than they got, but they got a 2-1 victory, and at home, they needed that because their away performances have been shocking this year. We saw the back-to-back 3-0 defeats at Derby and Blackburn prior. For Swansea, bit of a mixed start, but again, just a solid, consistent championship team. A 2-1 win at Coventry in a game where they were second best in the second half, but they'd already got that 2-0 advantage. And that early start ended up being crucial for them as they hung on for a 2-1 victory. Backing up the 1-0 win against Norwich is a good couple of weeks there for Swansea City. If they can do well in these 3 matches, they could go into the October break in the playoffs, which would be a lovely start. I don't know what to predict here, but I feel like with Bristol City's away form and performances this season, as much as they will improve soon, I have to go for a Swansea win. Most of their games have been tight this year. They've not scored bundles of goals. There was part of me that wanted to go 1-0, but I've already done that a few times this week. So let's go for 2-1 to Swansea City and entertainment on TV to finish off. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick recap of what we've gone for this weekend. I've gone with Heart over head on Friday night with Luton Town to nick the win at Plymouth. I've also gone for West Brom to maintain their unbeaten start, but only with a draw at Sheffield Wednesday. Whereas across the city in Sheffield, I went for Sheffield United to get the biggest win of the weekend in my predictions, a 3-0 win on the South Coast at Portsmouth. Those are just my predictions for this weekend's action though. Do you agree or disagree with them? Let me know in the comments section below and give me your predictions for Matchweek 7. If you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out in the next recap as we look ahead to the first full midweek fixture list this season. We'll be back late on Sunday evening as soon as I can get it out after the Swansea Bristol City game to look ahead to the 12 games that take place on Tuesday and Wednesday. In the meantime though, if you did enjoy this video, please do chuck a thumbs up on it. Also, subscribe and turn that notification bell on to stay up to date with everything. Manager specials seeming to come thick and fast at the start of this season. We had the Stoke one last week in the eye above. We should be adding a Cardiff City one to that very soon. There's also links up there to some of our interviews and other stuff too. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for being here as always. Enjoy the weekend's championship action. And I'll see you at the end of it on Sunday night to look ahead to match week 8 in midweek.